Sometimes, the smallest thing a person loses is the thing they cannot afford to lose. The dinner rush had already begun when the ring appeared. It rested beneath table 17, half hidden in the shadow cast by a mahogany chair, catching a thin ribbon of light from the crystal chandelier above. No one noticed it. Not the guests discussing mergers over imported wine. Not the managers moving through the dining room with practiced urgency. Not even the man who had dropped it. Claire Whitmore nearly walked past it herself. Her black shoes clicked softly against the polished floor as she carried a tray of sparkling water through the crowded restaurant. Then something flashed beneath the table. Just once. A quiet glimmer. She stopped. For a second, the noise around her seemed to fade. The laughter. The silverware. The distant piano. Everything. Claire carefully set the tray down on a nearby service station and knelt beside the table. Her fingers reached into the darkness. Cold metal touched her skin. She lifted the object into the light. A wedding ring. Heavy. Platinum. Expensive enough to cover months of rent. Around her, conversations continued uninterrupted. No one seemed aware of what had just happened. Claire turned the ring gently between her fingers. The metal reflected the warm glow of the restaurant. Then she noticed the engraving inside. For simple words. Forever, Eleanor. Claire stared for a moment longer than she intended. Something about the inscription felt different. Personal. Human. The kind of message nobody expected strangers to read. She slipped the ring into her apron pocket and stood. Not because she planned to keep it. Only because she wanted to return it to the right person. The question was who. Her eyes moved through the dining room. Couples celebrated anniversaries. Investors exchanged handshakes. Tourists photographed desserts they could barely pronounce. Then she saw him. Benjamin Carter sat alone near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan. The famous CEO occupied the most private table in the restaurant, though he barely seemed aware of the luxury surrounding him. His untouched coffee had gone cold nearly 30 minutes ago. A leather portfolio lay open beside him. His phone buzzed repeatedly. He ignored it. Claire had served him before. Everyone in the restaurant knew who he was. Billionaire. Founder. Corporate legend. Yet what stood out most was not his success. It was the silence around him. While others laughed, Benjamin rarely smiled. While others celebrated, he seemed somewhere else entirely. Tonight was no different. His gaze remained fixed on the city lights beyond the glass. Lost in thoughts nobody could see, Claire watched him for only a moment before returning to work. The ring remained in her pocket, warm now from the heat of her hand. She had no idea that within the next hour, that small piece of metal would become the center of a story neither of them would ever forget. For now, it was simply a ring beneath a table. A forgotten object. A quiet secret waiting to be discovered. Claire Whitmore had learned long ago that honesty was rarely the easiest choice. It was simply the one she could live with. The dinner rush rolled forward like a tide. Orders arrived. Glasses clinked. The scent of grilled salmon and fresh rosemary drifted through the air. Yet every few minutes her hand brushed against the apron pocket where the ring rested. Not because she was tempted by it. Because she understood that some objects carried more than value. They carried pieces of people. At 28, Claire knew something about loss. Life had taught her that lesson early. 3 mornings a week, she worked breakfast shifts at a small cafe downtown. 5 nights a week, she worked at the restaurant. The schedule left little room for sleep, but medical bills had a way of ignoring exhaustion. Her mother lived 40 miles away in a quiet Connecticut town where the paint peeled from the porch railings and winter seemed to arrive earlier every year. Claire sent money whenever she could. Sometimes it was enough. Sometimes it was not. Still, she never complained. Complaining never paid a bill. As she refilled water glasses near the window section, her eyes drifted toward Benjamin Carter again. He remained seated exactly where she had left him. The city stretched behind him like a sea of lights. Thousands of windows. Thousands of stories. Yet somehow he looked completely alone. A young executive approached his table carrying documents. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Benjamin signed several pages without even glancing up. Then the man left. Another phone call arrived. Benjamin silenced it. No expression crossed his face. No irritation. No interest. Just quiet distance. Claire had seen wealthy customers before. Plenty of them. Some arrived with entourages. Others demanded attention the moment they stepped through the door. Benjamin was different. The power surrounding him felt invisible. Like gravity. People adjusted themselves when he entered a room. Managers stood straighter. Investors smiled faster. Yet none of it seemed to reach him. As if the things most people chased no longer mattered. Claire collected empty plates from a nearby table. When she turned back, she noticed something unusual. Benjamin's left hand rested against the table. The finger where the ring should have been was bare. Her eyes moved to her apron pocket. So it was his. The realization settled quietly inside her. Suddenly, the inscription made more sense. Forever, Eleanor. Not a casual message. Not an anniversary gift. Something deeper. Something permanent. A wedding ring was easy to recognize. The way people touched it without thinking. The way their fingers searched for it during conversations. The way memories seemed attached to the metal itself. Claire wondered who Eleanor had been. Then she stopped herself. Some questions belonged to strangers. The answer was not hers to know. Across the room, Benjamin stared through the glass again. The reflection of Manhattan shimmered across his face. For a brief second, he looked less like a billionaire CEO and more like a man carrying something heavy that nobody else could see. Claire glanced at the clock above the bar. 10 minutes until her next break. 10 minutes until she could finally return what was never meant to belong to her. The clock above the bar moved closer to 9 o'clock as the restaurant settled into the quieter rhythm that followed the evening rush. Outside, Manhattan shimmered beneath a blanket of lights. Yellow taxis flowed through the streets like rivers of gold. Inside, the conversation softened. The piano continued playing somewhere near the entrance. Claire Whitmore stepped into the service corridor for a moment of calm. The ring remained safely in her apron pocket. She planned to return it during her break. Simple, quiet, uncomplicated. Yet something kept drawing her attention back to Benjamin Carter. Not because of his wealth, not because of his reputation, because there was a sadness about him that did not seem to belong in a room filled with success. Earlier that year, one of the younger servers had pointed him out during lunch service. "That is Benjamin Carter," she had whispered. "The man who built an empire from nothing." Everyone knew the public version of his story. Financial magazines loved printing it. Interviews celebrated it. Business schools studied it. The ambitious young entrepreneur who became one of the most influential executives in America before turning 40. But stories told in magazines rarely included the quiet parts. The empty apartments. The sleepless nights. The people no longer there. Claire picked up a tray of coffee cups and returned to the dining room. As she passed Benjamin's table, she noticed something she had missed before. Beside his leather portfolio sat a framed photograph no larger than a postcard. The silver frame reflected the chandelier light. A woman smiled from the picture. Blonde hair, bright eyes, genuine happiness. Not the practiced smile people used for social media. The kind that came from feeling completely at home with someone. Claire looked away immediately. She had not meant to stare. Still, she understood enough. Eleanor was real. Not simply a name engraved inside a ring. Not simply a memory. A person. Someone who had once occupied the seat across from him. Someone whose absence still lingered years later. Benjamin reached for his coffee. His hand paused halfway. For a brief second, his fingers brushed against the bare spot where the ring should have been. Claire noticed it instantly. So did he. His eyes lowered toward his hand, then returned to the city outside. The movement lasted less than a second. Yet something changed. Almost imperceptibly, like a crack appearing in glass. He touched the empty finger once more. Not searching. Not yet. Simply out of habit. Claire felt a quiet urgency rise inside her. The ring needed to be returned soon. Before worry arrived. Before panic replaced routine. A manager called her name from across the room. She delivered 2 desserts. Cleared another table. Answered questions about the menu. But her thoughts remained fixed on the small piece of platinum resting inside her pocket. Finally, her break arrived. 10 minutes. No more. No less. Claire stepped toward the employee hallway, then stopped. Across the dining room, Benjamin stood from his chair for the first time all evening. He gathered his documents, picked up the photograph, slipped it carefully into his portfolio, then absent-mindedly touched his ring finger again. This time his expression changed. Only slightly, but enough. The realization was beginning. Benjamin Carter froze. The movement was so small that nobody else noticed. A slight pause, a faint tightening around his eyes. His fingers returned to his left hand. The ring was gone. For a moment, he simply stared at the empty space, as if looking long enough might somehow bring it back. Then he checked again. His thumb moved across the bare skin. Once. Twice. The expression on his face remained controlled, but something deeper shifted beneath the surface. Claire watched from across the room. She knew that look. Not panic. Not yet. Disbelief. The mind refusing to accept what it already knows. Benjamin slowly placed his portfolio back on the table. The city lights outside no longer held his attention. His gaze moved downward. To the floor. To the chair. To the tablecloth. Every place a lost object might hide. He searched quietly at first, the way people search for something they fully expect to find within seconds. Claire slipped her hand into her apron pocket. The cool metal touched her fingers. She could return it now. Walk over. Place it on the table. End the entire situation in less than 10 seconds. But something stopped her. Not hesitation. Timing. Benjamin was already bending slightly beside his chair, looking beneath the table. Looking beneath the place where Claire had found it nearly an hour earlier. A server passed by carrying dessert plates. A businessman laughed loudly near the bar. The restaurant continued moving around him. Yet Benjamin seemed isolated from all of it, trapped inside a private moment nobody else understood. Claire noticed his hand reach toward the photograph before returning to the search. The silver frame remained beside him. Eleanor's smile reflected softly beneath the chandelier light. Suddenly, the ring seemed worth far more than platinum, far more than money. It was memory. It was history. It was the last physical connection to a chapter of life that could never return. Benjamin straightened slowly. He scanned the floor one more time. Then his attention shifted toward the nearest manager. Claire saw the decision forming before he spoke. The manager approached immediately. Benjamin said something quietly. The manager nodded and listened carefully. Whatever words were exchanged caused the manager's professional smile to disappear. Within seconds, 2 additional staff members joined the conversation. The search was no longer private. Claire exhaled softly. The moment had arrived. Across the room, employees began checking beneath nearby tables. Not because a valuable piece of jewelry was missing, because everybody understood who it belonged to. Yet none of them understood why it mattered. Claire did, or at least part of it. She looked toward Benjamin again. For the first time all evening, his composure seemed fragile. Not broken, just human. The powerful executive who controlled billion-dollar decisions suddenly looked like a man searching for something irreplaceable. Claire reached into her pocket and wrapped her fingers around the ring. The engraving pressed gently against her skin. Forever, Eleanor. For words that explained everything. Without another second of hesitation, she turned toward the hallway leading to the private coat room. A quiet idea had already formed in her mind. She knew exactly how she was going to return it. And if everything went according to plan, Benjamin Carter would never even know who had saved the most important thing he owned. The employee coat room sat at the end of a quiet hallway far removed from the elegance of the dining room. The walls were plain. The lighting was softer. The sounds of conversation faded into a distant hum. Claire Whitmore stepped inside and carefully closed the door behind her. For a moment she stood alone. The ring rested in the center of her palm. Under the fluorescent light, the platinum band looked almost ordinary. Small. Simple. Yet she knew better. Objects became valuable because of the stories attached to them. And some stories could never be replaced. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "What are you hiding?" Claire turned. Melissa, another server, leaned against the doorway holding a stack of folded menus. Claire opened her hand instinctively. Melissa's eyes widened. "That is not a cheap ring." Claire smiled faintly. "No, it is not." Melissa stepped closer. "Did somebody leave it?" "Something like that." Melissa examined the ring from a distance. "Honestly, that thing is probably worth more than my car." Claire looked down at the engraving once more. "Forever, Eleanor." The words seemed heavier now. Melissa noticed her expression. "You are taking it to Lost and Found." Claire nodded. "I am returning it." "Of course you are." Melissa laughed softly. "You always do the right thing." "It is honestly a little annoying." Claire smiled. "That sounds like a compliment." "It is." Melissa glanced toward the hallway. "For what it is worth, most people would not blame you for thinking twice." The words lingered after Melissa left. Most people would not blame you. Perhaps that was true. Life had not been especially generous lately. Rent had increased again. Her mother's medication costs seemed to rise every month. Last week, she had spent nearly 3 hours comparing grocery prices just to stay within budget. Yet somehow the possibility of keeping the ring had never felt real. Not even for a second. Because some lines could not be crossed. Not if she wanted to remain herself. Claire slipped the ring back into her hand and walked toward the executive coat area reserved for VIP guests. Benjamin's charcoal overcoat hung neatly among several others. She recognized it immediately. The tailored fabric, the discreet initials embroidered inside the collar. BC. She glanced down the hallway. Empty. The restaurant remained focused on the search happening out front. Managers checked tables. Staff checked service stations. Nobody paid attention to the coat room. Claire carefully opened one of the interior pockets, then paused. Her eyes fell upon a folded note tucked beside a pair of reading glasses. She did not read it, did not touch it. Some boundaries deserved respect. Instead, she gently placed the ring inside the pocket. Nothing dramatic. No speech. No announcement. Just a simple act completed in silence. The metal disappeared into the darkness of the coat lining. Safe. Protected. Returned. Claire closed the pocket and stepped back. The task was finished. The worry would end. Benjamin would eventually reach into his coat and find the ring exactly where it belonged. He would probably assume he had misplaced it himself. The thought made her smile. Then she turned to leave, unaware that only a few feet away, mounted above the hallway entrance, a security camera had quietly recorded everything. Claire returned to the dining room, believing the matter was finished. The ring was back where it belonged. The search would end. Life would move on. Sometimes the most meaningful things happened quietly and disappeared just as quietly. At least that was what she thought. The restaurant had grown calmer. Several tables were paying their checks. The piano player had shifted to slower melodies. Outside, a light rain began to fall across Manhattan, turning the city lights into soft reflections on the pavement below. Claire resumed her work, refilling glasses, clearing plates, smiling when customers thanked her. Yet across the room, Benjamin Carter remained standing beside his table. The search had not ended. In fact, it seemed to be growing. Two managers spoke with him near the entrance. A security supervisor had joined them. Their conversation remained professional, but the concern was obvious. Claire felt a small knot form in her stomach. She had expected Benjamin to retrieve his coat by now. Instead, the coat still hung untouched in the private wardrobe area. Apparently, he had no plans to leave anytime soon. One of the managers approached several employees and quietly asked whether anyone had seen a wedding ring. Most shook their heads. Others offered suggestions about where it might have fallen. Nobody had an answer. Claire considered speaking up. She could explain everything in less than 30 seconds. Yet something held her back. The ring was already safe. Revealing herself would only create unnecessary attention. Meanwhile, Benjamin moved toward the window again. His reflection stared back at him through the glass. The city stretched endlessly beyond, but his focus seemed fixed somewhere much farther away. Claire noticed him reach into his jacket pocket and remove the photograph once more. He looked at it for several seconds, not smiling, not crying, just remembering. Sometimes grief became so familiar that it stopped looking like sadness. It simply became part of a person's posture, part of the way they stood, part of the silence they carried. The security supervisor returned with a tablet containing surveillance footage from the dining room. Claire's eyes followed the device immediately. A strange feeling settled over her. She had forgotten about the cameras, not because she had done anything wrong, only because honest actions rarely expected witnesses. Benjamin and the supervisor reviewed several clips together. Footage from entrances, hallways, dining sections, different angles, different moments. The supervisor occasionally pointed at the screen while explaining something. Benjamin listened carefully. Then suddenly both men stopped. The supervisor tapped the display. Benjamin leaned closer. Whatever appeared on the screen had captured their full attention. Claire continued serving guests, but her pulse quickened slightly. Across the room, the supervisor rewound the footage, then played it again. Benjamin watched without speaking. The manager beside him exchanged a surprised glance with another employee. Claire did not need to see the screen to understand what they had found. Somewhere inside the security recordings, a young waitress had entered a coat room carrying a ring. And a few moments later, she had emerged empty-handed. The secret act she believed would remain invisible had quietly found an audience. Benjamin Carter said nothing for nearly a full minute. The security footage continued playing on the tablet screen. There was Claire kneeling beside table 17. There was Claire slipping the ring into her apron pocket. There was Claire entering the private coat room. And there was Claire leaving moments later with empty hands. No hesitation. No attempt to hide. No sign of someone taking advantage of an opportunity. Just quiet certainty. The security supervisor cleared his throat. Would you like us to speak with her, Mr. Carter? Benjamin kept his eyes on the screen. No. The answer came immediately. Calm. Firm. The supervisor looked surprised. Most people in Benjamin's position would have demanded answers. Asked questions. Started an investigation. Instead, Benjamin requested something unexpected. Check my coat. The manager hurried toward the wardrobe area. Several employees watched from a distance. Claire continued arranging glasses at a nearby station, pretending not to notice. A few moments later, the manager returned carrying the charcoal overcoat. Benjamin reached into the interior pocket. His hand disappeared into the fabric, then stopped. Slowly, he withdrew the ring. The platinum band rested in his palm beneath the dining room lights. For a second, nobody spoke. Relief crossed the manager's face. The security supervisor smiled politely. The problem was solved. Yet Benjamin remained focused on the ring itself. His thumb brushed across the engraving hidden inside. Forever, Eleanor. The familiar words seemed to anchor him somewhere far away. He closed his hand gently around the band. Not tightly, just enough to hold it. Then he looked across the dining room, directly toward Claire. She happened to glance up at the exact same moment. Their eyes met for only a second. Claire expected anger, questions, perhaps even gratitude. Instead, she saw something else entirely. Recognition, as though Benjamin had just discovered a truth larger than the ring itself. He gave the smallest nod, barely noticeable, then looked away. Claire returned to her work. The exchange lasted less than a heartbeat, yet it lingered. Near closing time, the restaurant slowly emptied. Chairs were straightened, tables reset for tomorrow. Rain tapped softly against the windows overlooking the city. Benjamin remained one of the last guests in the building. Not working, not taking calls, simply sitting with the photograph beside him and the ring once again on his finger. The security supervisor approached one final time. Everything resolved? Benjamin glanced down at the platinum band, then toward the dining room, where Claire moved quietly between tables. Yes, he said. Everything important. The supervisor nodded and left. Benjamin remained seated for another few minutes, watching nothing in particular, thinking about something he could not quite explain. In a city where people constantly wanted something from him, a stranger had been given the perfect opportunity to take. Instead, she had chosen to give back. And somehow that simple choice felt far more valuable than the ring itself. The restaurant finally closed a little after 10:30. One by one, the remaining employees finished their side work and prepared to leave. Outside, the rain continued falling in a steady rhythm against the glass, washing the city in silver reflections. Claire Whitmore wiped down her final table and checked the clock near the kitchen entrance. Another long shift completed. Her feet ached. Her shoulders felt heavy. Tomorrow would begin again in less than 7 hours. Yet there was comfort in routine. Routine kept life moving forward. She gathered her belongings from the employee locker room and slipped on her coat. Nearby, Melissa was already heading toward the exit. Good night, Claire. Good night. The dining room stood almost empty now. Chairs rested neatly beneath tables. Candlelight flickered across polished surfaces. The elegance remained, but without the crowd it felt quieter, more honest somehow. Claire stepped into the hallway leading toward the front entrance. Then she stopped. Benjamin Carter was still there, not seated this time, standing alone near the windows overlooking Park Avenue. The photograph remained tucked beneath his arm. The wedding ring had returned to its familiar place on his finger. He appeared deep in thought. For a moment, Claire considered taking a different route. She had no desire for attention, no desire for praise. But before she could turn away, Benjamin noticed her. Their eyes met once again. This time neither looked away. Benjamin crossed the distance slowly. Not like a billionaire approaching an employee. Not like a powerful man giving instructions. Simply like one person approaching another. Claire waited politely. You are Claire, correct? His voice was calm, softer than she expected. Yes, sir. Benjamin glanced briefly at the ring on his hand, then back at her. I believe I owe you my thanks. Claire felt a slight warmth rise in her cheeks. It was not necessary. It was. For a second, neither spoke. The rain filled the silence between them. Benjamin studied her expression carefully, not suspiciously, curiously, as though trying to understand something. Most people would have turned the ring into management. Claire smiled faintly. Perhaps. Most people would have wanted recognition. Perhaps. A small smile touched Benjamin's face for what seemed like the first time all evening. You make it difficult to thank you. Claire looked toward the city lights beyond the glass. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is return what belongs to them and let them keep their dignity. The words settled quietly in the air. Benjamin stared at her for a moment longer. Something in her answer seemed to reach him. Not because it was clever, because it was true. He nodded slowly. Then his gaze drifted toward the ring. His thumb brushed the metal unconsciously. She would have liked that answer, he said. Claire knew immediately who he meant. Eleanor. Yet she did not ask questions. Benjamin seemed grateful for that. Some memories needed space. Some stories revealed themselves only when they were ready. Outside, a taxi passed through the ring. Inside, two strangers stood beneath the soft restaurant lights, sharing a moment neither had expected when the evening began. Claire stepped out into the rain a few minutes later, expecting the conversation to fade into memory like countless customer interactions before it. The cool night air carried the scent of wet pavement and distant traffic. She pulled her coat tighter and began the short walk toward the subway station. Behind her, the restaurant lights glowed warmly against the darkness. Ahead, Manhattan moved with its usual restless energy. Yet inside the restaurant, Benjamin Carter remained standing near the windows long after Claire disappeared into the ring. Her words continued echoing in his mind. Return what belongs to them and let them keep their dignity. Such a simple thought, yet strangely powerful. For years, people had approached him with requests, proposals, ambitions, and expectations. Investors wanted access. Journalists wanted stories. Competitors wanted advantages. Even well-meaning acquaintances often wanted something. Very few people simply did the right thing when nobody was watching. Benjamin looked down at the ring once more. The platinum surface reflected the city lights. Eleanor used to believe that character revealed itself in ordinary moments. Not grand gestures, not public speeches, small choices, quiet decisions, the things people did when there was no reward waiting at the end. He remembered her saying it during a summer evening many years ago, back when their future still felt endless. The memory arrived unexpectedly, so vivid that for a moment he could almost hear her voice. Benjamin closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. The restaurant manager approached carefully. Everything all right, Mr. Carter? Benjamin nodded. Yes. The manager hesitated. We are fortunate to have employees like Claire. Benjamin looked toward the entrance where she had exited minutes earlier. Yes, he said softly. You are. The manager smiled politely before returning to his duties. A few minutes later, Benjamin finally gathered his belongings. The photograph, the portfolio, the coat. He walked toward the exit. But before leaving, he paused beside the security office. The supervisor looked up from his desk. Good evening, Mr. Carter. Benjamin considered his next words carefully. The footage from earlier. Yes. Delete it. The supervisor blinked. Delete it. Benjamin nodded. There is no investigation. No incident. No reason to keep it. The supervisor seemed confused but complied immediately. Of course. Benjamin thanked him and walked away. Outside, the rain had softened into a gentle mist. His driver opened the rear door of a black sedan waiting at the curb. Benjamin settled into the back seat and stared through the rain-streaked window as the city passed by. Most people would have expected him to reward Claire with money. A check, a bonus, some dramatic gesture. Yet something told him she would not want that. The honesty he witnessed had not been performed for recognition. It had come from somewhere deeper, somewhere rare. As the car disappeared into the Manhattan night, Benjamin realized something surprising. He no longer felt grateful merely because the ring had been returned. He felt grateful because, for the first time in a very long while, someone had reminded him that goodness still existed in the world without needing an audience. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale winter sunlight. Claire Whitmore stood behind the counter of a small cafe 3 blocks from Grand Central Station, pouring coffee into paper cups while commuters hurried past the windows. The city had already returned to its usual pace. Fast, loud, unforgiving. To everyone else, the previous evening had been nothing more than another shift. Another customer. Another night. But somewhere across Manhattan, Benjamin Carter found himself thinking about a waitress he barely knew. He sat alone in the top-floor conference room of Carter Holdings, 38 stories above the streets below. Executives filled the long table. Charts glowed on oversized screens. Quarterly projections covered dozens of pages. Yet Benjamin's attention drifted. His wedding ring caught the morning light as he rested his hand on a stack of reports. The sight of it brought back the memory of Claire quietly placing someone else's peace of mind ahead of her own circumstances. The board meeting ended shortly before noon. One executive remained behind to discuss a pending acquisition. Another requested approval for a new investment project. Benjamin listened carefully, answered questions, and signed documents. Still, a thought lingered beneath everything else. During a short break, his assistant Rebecca entered carrying several folders. "Your schedule is completely full this afternoon," she said. Benjamin nodded, then paused. "Rebecca, yes. Can you find something out for me?" She smiled. "Usually that means you already know the answer." A faint smile appeared on Benjamin's face. "Perhaps." 20 minutes later, Rebecca returned. She placed a thin file on his desk. Claire Whitmore, 28 years old. Works 2 restaurant jobs and a morning cafe shift. Benjamin looked up. 3 jobs. Rebecca nodded. According to payroll records, yes. Benjamin opened the file. The information inside was ordinary. No scandals. No dramatic history. No hidden surprises. Yet somehow that made the story more remarkable. Claire was not extraordinary because of a secret. She was extraordinary because of a choice. A choice she made when nobody expected it. Benjamin continued reading. He learned about the long commute, the modest apartment, the mother living in Connecticut, the medical expenses, small details, quiet struggles, the kind most people carried without ever speaking about them. Finally, he closed the file and stared out the office window. Thousands of people moved below, each carrying invisible burdens, each fighting battles strangers would never see. Rebecca studied him curiously. "May I ask why this interests you?" Benjamin considered the question, then answered honestly. "Because I spent years believing character was rare." He looked down at the ring once more. "Yesterday someone reminded me that it is not." Rebecca glanced toward the city skyline. "Are you planning to contact her?" Benjamin leaned back in his chair. For a moment he thought about writing a check, sending flowers, offering a reward. Then he remembered Claire's expression when he thanked her. The quiet certainty, the complete absence of expectation. "Not yet," he said softly. "Some people deserve appreciation." His gaze shifted toward the sunlight reflecting across the platinum band. "But first I want to understand what kind of person chooses honesty when life would have given them every excuse not to." 3 days passed before Benjamin Carter saw Claire Whitmore again. Not intentionally. At least that was what he told himself. Yet on Thursday morning, his driver found itself taking a slightly different route through Midtown. A route that happened to pass the small cafe near Grand Central Station. Benjamin sat in the back seat reviewing reports when he looked through the window and spotted her immediately. Claire stood behind the counter filling coffee orders while a line of customers stretched toward the door. She moved quickly, efficiently, calmly. The same quiet confidence she carried in the restaurant appeared here too. Nothing about her behavior suggested someone hoping to be noticed. In fact, she seemed determined not to be. Benjamin watched for a few moments before asking the driver to continue. He had no intention of interrupting her morning, but the image stayed with him throughout the day. Later that afternoon, a meeting ran longer than expected. Investors debated numbers. Attorneys reviewed contracts. Executives discussed expansion plans. Yet when the conversation finally ended, Benjamin found himself thinking about something entirely different. Character. The word returned again and again. In business, people often revealed themselves when money was involved. But character revealed itself when money was not involved. That distinction mattered. Meanwhile, Claire's week continued exactly as usual. Early mornings, long shifts, crowded subway rides, phone calls with her mother, bills waiting on the kitchen counter of her apartment. Nothing had changed. She never mentioned Benjamin Carter to anyone. The ring had been returned. The story was finished, at least in her mind. Friday evening arrived with freezing temperatures and a sharp wind sweeping through the city. Claire finished her shift at the restaurant shortly after 9. As she stepped outside, her phone vibrated. A message from her mother appeared on the screen. The prescription costs had increased again. Claire stared at the number for several seconds. It was not impossible, just difficult, like so many things lately. She slipped the phone into her pocket and began walking toward the subway entrance. Halfway down the block, she noticed an elderly man struggling with 2 heavy grocery bags near a crosswalk. Cars rushed past. The wind pulled at his coat. Several pedestrians walked around him without slowing down. Claire did not hesitate. She crossed the street and offered to help. Together, they carried the bags nearly 3 blocks to a small apartment building. The entire task took less than 15 minutes. The man thanked her repeatedly. Claire smiled and wished him a good evening before continuing home. She never noticed the black sedan parked across the street. Never noticed the familiar figure seated inside. Benjamin had been leaving a business dinner nearby when he witnessed the entire exchange through the car window. No cameras, no audience, no possibility of recognition. Just another quiet choice. Another moment when helping someone would have been easier to ignore. Benjamin leaned back against the leather seat and watched Claire disappear into the crowd. For the second time in a single week, she had done something kind when nobody expected it and nobody was watching. And suddenly he understood what he had been searching for ever since the night of the ring. He was not curious about one honest decision. He was curious about a person whose honesty seemed to be a way of life. The following Tuesday, rain returned to Manhattan. Not the dramatic kind that stopped traffic or filled headlines. Just a steady gray curtain drifting between buildings and softening the edges of the city. Claire Whitmore finished her morning shift at the cafe and checked her phone while waiting for the subway. 3 missed calls from a pharmacy. 1 message from her mother. The prescription refill could not wait any longer. Claire closed her eyes for a moment. The number attached to the message felt larger than her bank account wanted it to be. She had faced difficult months before. She would face this one too. Somehow. She always did. Across town, Benjamin Carter stood in his office staring at a document that had nothing to do with business. It was a proposal, a small one by corporate standards, barely noticeable among the billion-dollar projects that crossed his desk every week. A charitable foundation operated by Carter Holdings had quietly funded emergency medical assistance programs for years. Normally, Benjamin approved the recommendations without much involvement. Today was different. He found himself reading every page. Not because of the program itself, because he had spent the past week thinking about what real help looked like. Not rewards, not publicity. Help. The kind that preserved dignity instead of drawing attention to hardship. That afternoon, Claire arrived at the restaurant for another shift. The manager called her into his office before she reached the dining room. Her first thought was that something had gone wrong. Managers rarely requested private meetings for good reasons. Yet when she entered, the manager looked strangely cheerful. Claire, sit down. She obeyed cautiously. The manager slid a folder across the desk. This came in today. Claire opened it. Inside was a letter. Formal. Professional. The contents took several seconds to process. A medical assistance grant had been approved through a private foundation. The funding covered nearly all of her mother's upcoming treatment expenses. Claire blinked once, then twice, certain she had misunderstood something. There has to be a mistake. The manager shook his head. No mistake. Claire looked back at the letter. There were no names attached. No explanation. No publicity. No requests. Simply approval. Quiet help arriving exactly when it was needed most. Hours later, after the dinner rush had slowed, Claire stepped outside behind the restaurant to call her mother. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes. By the end, both women were laughing, something they had not done enough recently. When the call ended, Claire remained standing beneath the evening sky. Relief felt unfamiliar after carrying worry for so long. Across the street, unnoticed among passing traffic, a black sedan paused briefly at a red light. Benjamin Carter sat inside. He saw Claire smiling as she lowered her phone, saw the weight missing from her shoulders. Then the light changed. The car moved forward. He never rolled down the window, never called her name, never claimed responsibility. Some gifts did not need signatures. And some acts of gratitude carried the most meaning when they remained as quiet as the kindness that inspired them. 1 year later, spring sunlight poured across the windows of a renovated community center in Connecticut. Children filled the hallways carrying backpacks. Parents gathered near bulletin boards. Volunteers prepared tables for an afternoon scholarship ceremony. Above the entrance hung a simple sign bearing the name of a new educational foundation dedicated to helping working families facing medical and financial hardship. Claire Whitmore stood near the front of the room, greeting guests as they arrived. Her life looked different now. Not easier in every way. Not perfect, but different. Her mother was healthier. The constant fear that had followed them for years no longer occupied every conversation. The foundation had grown beyond anything Claire imagined. Scholarships had been awarded. Emergency assistance had reached families who needed a second chance. Quiet acts of support had become opportunities for hundreds of people. Across the room, Benjamin Carter watched the crowd from a respectful distance. He rarely attended public events connected to the foundation. He preferred the work to receive attention rather than the people behind it. Yet today felt important. Not because of the organization, because of what it represented. A year earlier, two strangers had crossed paths for only a few moments inside a Manhattan restaurant. One had lost something precious. The other had chosen to return it without expecting anything in return. That single decision had created a ripple neither of them could have predicted. Claire noticed Benjamin standing near a window and walked over. The years had not erased the quiet understanding between them. They exchanged a warm smile. Nothing dramatic, nothing rehearsed, just mutual respect. Benjamin glanced toward the students gathering for the ceremony. "You built something remarkable." Claire shook her head gently. "A lot of people built this." Benjamin smiled. "That sounds like something you would say." For a moment, they stood together watching families fill the room with laughter and conversation. Then Benjamin looked down at his left hand. The platinum ring remained exactly where it belonged. Time had softened the pain attached to it, though the memories remained. Eleanor's name was still engraved inside. Forever, Eleanor. Not as a reminder of loss anymore, as a reminder of gratitude. Claire followed his gaze and understood without words. Some things never truly leave us. They simply teach us how to carry them differently. The ceremony began. Names were called. Scholarships awarded. Applause filled the room. And somewhere among the smiles and hopeful faces, both Claire and Benjamin recognized a simple truth. The most powerful changes rarely begin with grand plans. They begin with small choices. A moment of honesty. A gesture of kindness. A decision made when nobody is watching. As the afternoon sunlight filled the room, the story finally came full circle. Not because someone became wealthy, not because someone became famous, but because dignity had been met with dignity, and kindness had quietly found its way home. If this story reminded you that goodness still exists in the smallest corners of everyday life, share your thoughts below. Stories like these continue because people believe in them. And if you would like to hear more journeys about quiet courage, unexpected grace, and the choices that change lives, you are always welcome to join us again.